The relationship between the British royal family and Nazi Germany is one of the most sensitive and carefully managed subjects in modern British history. It touches on questions of loyalty, patriotism, and the limits of political sympathy that remain uncomfortable more than 80 years after the war's end. And at the center of this discomfort stands a single figure, Edward, Duke of Windsor, formerly King Edward VIII, the man who abdicated the British throne in December 1936, and who, in the years that followed, developed associations with the Nazi regime that have never been fully explained or satisfactorily resolved. Edward Albert Christian George Andrew Patrick David, known to his family as David, was born in 1894, the eldest son of the future King George V and Queen Mary. He grew up in the suffocating formality of the Edwardian court, educated by tutors, and shaped by a family culture that prized duty, protocol, and emotional restraint above all else. He served in the First World War, though his position as heir to the throne prevented him from seeing frontline action, and he emerged from the conflict with a genuine sympathy for the ordinary soldier and a restlessness that would define his character for the rest of his life. As Prince of Wales, Edward was enormously popular. He was handsome, charming, and apparently modern in his sympathies. He visited the depressed industrial regions of Britain during the hardships of the 1920s and 1930s, and was visibly moved by what he saw, famously declaring that something must be done. He seemed, to the public at least, to represent a new kind of monarchy, one that was engaged with the real problems of ordinary people, rather than sealed behind the walls of palace ceremony. But behind the public image, Edward was a man of considerable personal weakness. He was indecisive, self-pitying, and prone to infatuations that alarmed his family and his advisors. The most consequential of these infatuations was with Wallis Simpson, an American divorcee, whose social ambition and forceful personality exerted a hold over Edward that neither his family, his government, nor the established church could break. The abdication crisis of 1936 is well known. Edward, who had become king in January of that year following the death of his father, was determined to marry Simpson, whose divorce from her second husband was not yet final. The marriage was unacceptable to the British government, the Church of England, and the governments of the Dominions, all of whom regarded the twice-divorced American as an unsuitable consort for the King and Supreme Governor of the Church of England. Faced with the choice between the woman he loved and the crown, Edward chose the woman. He abdicated on the 11th of December, 1936, making a radio address to the nation, in which he explained that he could not carry out his duties without the help and support of the woman he loved. He was succeeded by his younger brother, who became George VI. The abdication itself, while dramatic, is not the most troubling chapter of Edward's story. What followed is, after leaving Britain, Edward and Simpson, now the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, moved to the European continent, eventually settling in France. And it was during this period that Edward's political sympathies became a matter of serious concern to the British government, and eventually to history. Edward's views on Germany were not unusual for a man of his class and generation. Many members of the British aristocracy in the 1930s were sympathetic to Germany, motivated by a combination of anti-communism, a sense that the Treaty of Versailles had been unjust, and a genuine admiration for what they perceived as the economic and social achievements of the Nazi regime. Some went further, actively supporting fascist movements in Britain, or cultivating personal relationships with senior Nazis. Edward's sympathies fell somewhere on the spectrum, and the precise location has been debated by historians ever since. What is documented is that in October 1937, less than a year after his abdication, Edward and the Duchess visited Nazi Germany as guests of the regime. They toured factories and social housing projects, met with senior Nazi officials, and most damagingly, met with Adolf Hitler himself at the Berghof, Hitler's mountain retreat in Bavaria. Photographs of the Duke and the Führer shaking hands and smiling were distributed worldwide. Edward appeared impressed by what he saw and reportedly made comments that were sympathetic to the German position on various issues. Whether he understood or cared about the full nature of the Nazi regime, including its persecution of minorities and its suppression of democratic freedoms, is unclear. What is clear is that the visit was a propaganda triumph for Berlin and an embarrassment for London. The British government's concern about Edward's German sympathies intensified when war broke out in September 1939. The Duke and Duchess were in France, and their position was awkward. Edward held no official role, and had no clear function. His presence in Europe, close to the war zone, and potentially vulnerable to German capture or enticement, was a source of anxiety for British intelligence. The fear, which was taken seriously at the highest levels, was that the Germans might attempt to use Edward as a tool, either by capturing him and using him as a bargaining chip, or by persuading him to cooperate with a German-occupied Britain in the event of a successful invasion. These fears were not entirely without foundation. German intelligence records, captured after the war, revealed that the Nazi leadership had indeed considered the possibility of using Edward. In the summer of 1940, when the Duke and Duchess were in Portugal, the SS intelligence chief Walter Schellenberg was tasked with making contact with the couple and exploring the possibility of bringing them to Germany or to a German-controlled territory. The details of what transpired in Portugal are murky, and the extent to which Edward was aware of or receptive to German overtures is disputed. Some accounts suggest that he was approached, and that he expressed views that were at least ambiguous. Others maintain that he was unaware of the plot, and that his loyalty to Britain, whatever his political sympathies, was never in question. Churchill, who was now Prime Minister, and who had a complex personal relationship with Edward that combined genuine affection with political exasperation, decided that the safest course was to remove the Duke from the European theater entirely. In August 1940, Edward was appointed governor of the Bahamas, a position of minimal strategic importance, but one that placed him safely across the Atlantic, far from the temptations and dangers of wartime Europe. Edward accepted the posting with poor grace, regarding it as exile, which, in a sense, it was. The Duke and Duchess spent the war years in the Bahamas, where Edward's governorship was unremarkable. He administered the colony competently, if without distinction, engaged in minor controversies, and chafed at his isolation from the centers of power and society. The war ended, the world moved on, and the Windsors settled into a post-war life of wealthy, rootless exile, dividing their time between Paris and various social circuits. Celebrities without a country, public figures without a public role. The question of how close Edward came to being a Nazi collaborator, or whether that characterization is unfair, has been argued over for decades. The release of previously classified documents in the 1990s and 2000s added fuel to the debate without resolving it. The documents, including diplomatic cables and intelligence reports, painted a picture of a man who was, at the very least, naive about the nature of the Nazi regime and careless about the political implications of his associations and his statements. Whether naivety and carelessness constitute something more culpable is a judgment that depends on one's assessment of Edward's character, his intelligence, and his moral awareness. What is not in dispute is that the episode revealed vulnerabilities in the British state that were profoundly uncomfortable. The idea that a former king, a man who had sat on the throne of the most powerful empire in the world, could be a potential liability in wartime. A man whose loyalties might be suspect, and whose capture or defection could be exploited by the enemy, was a scenario that no constitutional framework had prepared for. Edward's story exposed the tension between personal conviction and public duty, between the private sympathies of the individual and the demands of the role they hold. It is a tension that exists in every democracy, but it is rarely demonstrated with such clarity or such high stakes. Edward died in Paris in 1972, largely estranged from the royal family and from the country he had briefly ruled. The question of his wartime sympathies followed him to the grave and beyond, a permanent asterisk on a life that had once held the promise of a new kind of monarchy. History has not been kind to him, and the judgments have hardened with time, as the full horror of the regime he flirted with has become ever more completely documented and understood. Whether Edward, Duke of Windsor, was a Nazi sympathizer, a useful fool, or merely a weak and foolish man who found himself out of his depth in the most dangerous period of the 20th century, is a question that each generation answers according to its own standards and its own needs. What is certain is that the question itself will not go away. because the stakes it represents, the tension between personal freedom and public responsibility, between private belief and national loyalty, are as relevant now as they were in the summer of 1940, when a former king sat in a villa in Portugal, while the world decided its fate.